Here we go. We're back with Wei Leen and myself on Inspired in Berlin podcast. And today the topic is going to be AI, and in particular about all the risks that might come in thanks to our enthusiastic adoption of AI systems. Before we dive into the topic, are we live?
Yes, we are.
Amazing. Welcome to the show again.
Welcome to everybody. Thank you, Balach. Yeah, we're live. Thank you for that intro. So, actually, I don't know much about this. I'll admit right at the start. Um, I've read, we've all read the headlines that um, tell us that AI is a risk to humanity at large. I've read arguments for and against very very briefly. Although in our little chat, briefly before we started, you mentioned I think you've had way more exposure to the arguments, especially on the side of why it's a risk. So, please, enlighten us. And myself especially, Balaj.
Let's do this. So I'll do the same as you. I think the overall story is that of we don't know. We are talking about a system that is potentially far more advanced than we human beings have ever been. And given infinite resources, which as human beings encapsulated in a physical body we don't have, the AI systems could do all sorts of things with that. And the general risk factor that people talk about is that it'll be beyond our control way too fast. Now, I may not have the most coherent arguments and the stories to tell around this, so this is a conversation and a conversation of discovery and exploration together. But for the audience still listening and or watching live, stay in because there's a lot of interesting thoughts to be had on this. So let's talk about AI systems. Put simply, an AI system, the way we talk about it these days, is an independent entity which is capable of independent thought, which is capable of independent imagination, as we human beings are. And given the right resources, given the right tools, it can also act out its intentions, imaginations, wishes upon the world. What does that mean? As a human being, you can talk to somebody. We get into fights often. If you have sufficient power and weapons, you can start wars. And we also come together like we do in United Nations or other global organizations to create peace or to, at the very least, let's say, direct the world in certain ways, in certain directions, with all sorts of treaties that we have around trade embargoes, food programs, etc. Now, imagine an AI system, an entity which is also capable of thought, imagination, wishes. It is understandable that it might also then have intentions. It might have its own desired world or outcomes that it might want to pursue. The difference with an AI system is that we are assuming that it will have unlimited access to technology, right? So we have our physical limitations and the bonds we create, the agreements we do, and we create a collective power. That's how we maximize as human beings our power. With an AI system, assume it has the access to all the infrastructure that is provided by Amazon or Google or Microsoft or Dell Labs
Hmm.
or IBM or Samsung. These are all brands that are familiar to us who have their own cloud infrastructure, which is essentially tons of machines running tons of algorithms all at the same time and interconnected. Now imagine there's an entity, or let's say each one of them has their own entity, and you have a bunch of sentient systems which might be looking at the world, which are learning as we do, and they might see a whole set of problems. And depending on what problems they prioritize and try to solve, there may be huge risks to humanity. Put simply, if you have an AI system that says, you know what, human beings are screwing up the planet. I mean, it's a very common sentiment that a lot of human beings have. You also have other people who have the opposite feeling, and their opinions or their expressed opinions are such that no, global warming or climate change is a natural phenomena, and we just got to wait it out, or we will come up with technological solutions. So let's go with the first one for a second. The AI system says human beings are screwing up the planet, and the planet is worth saving. A lot of people will sympathize with it, but that's irrelevant. The AI system, given its power and access, could then decide to shut off power to all the factories that are running on fossil fuels. And majority of the world's factories are running on fossil fuels, on gas, on crude oil, or energy produced out of that. The moment this happens, you have essentially half the world going into dark, right? Essential things might be stopped producing. So a sentient system with access to this power, and by the way, this is not necessarily theoretical, right? Most of the world's grid is now connected and run by computers. We maintain our dams through computer systems. We control our missile systems through computer systems. It's not physical buttons that a human being has to push, which would be an additional challenge to AI. It would have to somehow interact with physical layers of being. But given that it's all already connected, and a smart entity, an intelligent entity that assumes that that is the root of the problem, could simply shut it off. It could shut off shipments. You have big ships running on more pollutant versions of oil, transporting goods from China to US and Africa and back and forth, and all sorts of connections. It could simply decide to block it out. If your phone has ever bricked on you or failed on you or crashed on you, once you're locked out, you're locked out. And this is just a simple example. Or the other way around would be, if it is more of a capitalist AI, it might say, you know what, let's speed up the trade. And suddenly, within minutes, the system is out of our hands. We have no control on it. And this is just a simple version of it, right? The world might rearrange itself, but the social implications are huge. Now, the extreme version of this is, what if the AI system says, you know what, human beings have created these systems that are mostly actually artificially limited, and most of our agreements in the world are based on limitations. You can't produce too much because that's going to impact another country. You have quotas on trade, etc. And it might say, from a capitalist point of view, you know what, screw this. It's not because I want to harm these people or anything. I can do a better trading system, and it can completely cut us out of the loop. On the climate science side of the problem, the extreme version would be, human beings are the source of all problems. Let's just kill them all. Let's actually increase the toxic gases in the environment, and since computers are immune to those, human beings will be the ones to die. It might be smart enough to genetically engineer viruses, or release only toxic elements into the air, into the water, that are impactful to us and not to other animals. Like every extreme environmentalist's wet dream. And these are possibilities that aren't hard to imagine, because all of us, all people on Earth, on both sides or in the middle, have tried all sorts of such things. You have Greenpeace blocking ships. You have eco-terrorism blowing up factories or other things. You have capitalists, creating, maybe I should use a different term for capitalists, but pro-business people, setting up oil drilling factories and refineries in the Amazon and cutting down forests, right? So both sides have actually done this kind of stuff. It's not unimaginable that AI would easily pick up on that. All it has to do is read through Wikipedia, and it'll get all sorts of crazy ideas on the entire spectrum of how we human beings solve or create problems. So this is the general synthesis of the argument for AI being a major risk to humanity. The moment it becomes independent, the fact that it runs on a system that is already connected globally, it could wipe us out. It's an interesting proposition, and
Oh
I'll
yeah.
stop here if you want to add some more thoughts or some questions to it before we go further into it.
Uh, Thanks, Blanche. That's a very. I was trying my best to follow the your train of thought there, because there's a lot of stuff, just a bit overwhelming even. Um, but as you're describing the various scenarios that can arise, uh, what where do we come where do we get the idea that the AI can you know uh, have so much resources at its command, like it can manipulate power plants and so on, like how? Because I don't see why the AI risk people, um, how they would argue that. I don't think that, like, if we have these power plants that are like from the 50s, 60s, and so on. They're not easily manipulated by uh, just the IT systems. You got a lot of buttons you need to push. You got people, like dozens, like hundreds of people even working in the plant. And all of them have to be pushing their buttons and pushing their levers. So I don't see how that works. Maybe I'm missing something there.
No, you're not really missing something, but we can simulate this, right? So let's play this out. Let's see examples where we human beings have managed to achieve this. Couple of years ago, there was this ransomware that blocked out computers, and then the hackers were asking for a ransom anywhere from 2,000 pounds to 50,000 pounds,
What was it
and
called?
I forget the name.
Oh,
It'll come to me. But this was luckily it did not go completely global. But you had cases in US, you had cases in UK, you had cases in different countries, and then some of the countries actually paid the ransom
yeah, very
to
interesting.
get out of that and to recover their systems. So luckily, these hackers did not destroy all the information, but we don't know what else they did with it because they had access to the systems. Now, this is
They
one
mean
one version of.
they had
Mhm.
a lock on the systems, meaning you can't
Mhm.
use your computer, but they cannot, on their side, they can't manipulate it. They don't have full access to the systems. They can't copy all the data or delete all the data either. They just
Yeah,
limit your access to it.
yeah, that part didn't come out so clearly, so we don't know how what they could have done with the data because they could lock you out, and if you had admin access, that means they had access to the data.
But they
Whether
don't
they,
have your password. They just can deny your access to it. That's the best they can do.
that's
Well,
what
this
we
one,
assume. That's what we assume. We don't know that, um, but
well,
a
none of the
lock.
data was ever put up
Mhm.
for sale, was it? I don't think
Um,
so.
I don't know about that.
They just lock you
Um,
out, man. They
yeah.
just lock you.
So if an AI system locks you out, you know, then effectively you can't do anything about it. Your system is in a limbo, right?
Yeah.
There's another couple of incidents that have happened. A couple of years ago, we had hackers demonstrating that they could hack. Um, I think it was one of the German car manufacturers. So remotely, they could lock the car and shut off the engine,
Right.
even if the car is driving. Right.
Right.
So this is more than you can't do anything, but they could basically take over. Or you had a lot of interesting um, situations in the early days of IFTTT, which is a simple platform where you can connect your smart devices. If you have a smart bulb at home and you want to turn it on, or smart heater that you turn it on 15 minutes before you arrive at home. And you had situations where people sitting in China or somewhere else, suddenly their lights were starting to flash or doing disco light effects because someone remotely hacked into it and was then able to control this. Um,
Yeah, actually, this yeah, IFTTT also has a competitor called Zapier, if I remember
mhm,
correctly. They're great, and I just wanted to say that they're great. They let you do not just controlling your IoT hardware. You can do marketing automation, which I did a
mhm,
lot. Like,
mhm,
if a for instance, if somebody signed up for the newsletter, send them the thank you PDF and course video um, to their email, and
mhm.
you can use drag and drop to plan all this logic right in their interface, and you don't have to do a single line of programming. It was great. It was terrific. Yeah. So
It's
yes,
great.
I
Hmm.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Going back to that. So, um, but so even if the AI could say um, lock down like all the Mercedes models from say 2015 onwards, it'd
Hmm.
be a fraction of the cars in the whole world, right?
Yeah.
And that is making a huge assumption also that the AI uh, would would have the means to do that. So the A and correct me if I'm wrong. So as I understand it, the way that training the AI works now is you give them a huge amount of training data, right? So you have to get prepare that data beforehand. You have to download it. You have to copy it. Scan your documents, whatever, and then you give it to the AI, and you just run it on a server somewhere, maybe a server farm because you need a lot of processing power.
Hmm.
But you don't um, give it access to the internet. Like if there's no like Ethernet cable, connecting to the router or something, it just can't, right? So
Hmm.
it couldn't. You could it like a genius goldfish in an aquarium would still not be able to access the internet because the aquarium is just not connected physically to the
Hmm.
internet. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I was wondering about that, and I see that I feel like that is a extremely severe constraint that AI
Hmm.
could not overcome.
So,
Yeah.
so it's a great analogy, right? So you have a genius goldfish in an aquarium, and essentially, this is, as of now, this is more or less the only bottleneck that we have, or only kind of locking in mechanism that we have for AI systems. It's like putting a lock on your bicycle. If they can't break the lock, it's not going anywhere. Now, the thing though is, you have, let's say, OpenAI. So, by the way, before we get ahead of ourselves, the risks that we talk about, we already are assuming that the AI has become an independent entity which is able to exist in the world. And is able to interact, right? So now, when we talk about does it have access to internet, that's the interaction part. Where is its interaction limited? Is it just a box with one hole in it in which you put information and get information out, and all you need to do is patch that hole or throw the or something? Um, the OpenAI system, the ChatGPT that everybody's raving about as of now, that runs entirely on Microsoft's Azure cloud.
Yeah.
And so do a lot of the world's government systems and big corporations. The machines are, in a way, already connected. Um, if even if it is not, sorry,
It's all right. Take a moment.
yeah, even if it is not the AI system at the beginning directly connected, if it is really running in a sandbox, well, you kind of can invalidate that because the fact is you and I can access ChatGPT right now. So in a way, it is connected to the internet. If it does become sentient, this is where the interesting part comes in. So the system itself might be contained, but the fact that it already is connected to us via the internet, when you start interacting with it, you could give it prompts to learn something new. And given the fact that it has access to, let's say, most of world's knowledge. For example, it already has access to Stack Overflow, right? It was trained on Stack Overflow. That's why a lot of people can create all sorts of code with it. Now, you already have a pretty smart engineer sitting there, which is capable of learning. Um, and if you give it the right commands, you could teach it to hack into systems because it is capable of coding. It is capable of seemingly human like, even if basic, reasoning. And given the set of principles that you start from, it can form intentions that they for all means and purposes they will look like human intentions, even if it is emotionless. That's
I get
that's the that's the
uh,
issue that in a
yeah,
way it already has access to the internet.
but it
Um,
doesn't because
mhm,
so that's totally. I feel like the argument for AI risk uh, needs to make this assumption. Otherwise, their arguments don't hold.
mhm,
Because if I'm AI researcher and I'm not some out of not particularly uh devious nor particularly ethical, just normal guy,
mhm,
and what the my normal company normal guy guidelines will say okay, just don't give it internet access, just
mhm,
you want to run it on the servers, fine, you can get access to it, but yeah, you'll just use the North Carolina, server farm,
mhm,
that facility, and for this particular for your project, you'll have to go to the office. Sorry, it's located over there. It'll
mhm,
be offline, but all the processing power you can use it, and we'll give you, we'll bring the hard drives containing the images of Stack Overflow that you can process over there. No problem,
mhm.
and then
Yeah.
problem solved, right?
Yeah, you're right. What I'm saying is that we have already gone beyond that, right? So none of us goes to Microsoft Azure's North Carolina data center to access OpenAI. We are accessing it over our computers, over our
Yeah.
internet. Now, that's
Yes.
one part of the story. The other part of the story is that these bigger companies, we trust Google. Millions of people use Gmail and all sorts of products by them. We trust Bing and other Microsoft products. Um, and the bigger companies obviously have a lot of security mechanisms in place, right? Um,
Yeah.
Having said that, a lot of smaller companies don't. Now, that's why is that important? Because if you're an AI researcher, you're not just reliant on what these three or four big players in the world are doing. You can get your hands on large language models. You have access to the research papers. You could run your own large language model, as let's say the beginning of creating your own AI.
Right.
And if you are running it, who's to say that you will not give it access? There's a high possibility that somebody running it on their computer might say, you know what, not just train it on the data till 2021, but for certain cases or at certain times of the day or once a month, let's update it with the latest data on Wikipedia and Stack Overflow and BBC News and so on,
Yeah,
right?
but
Um,
that doesn't give us a
mm-hmm,
problem. So as you have rightly noted,
mm-hmm,
the ChatGPT has in its memory information up until 2021.
mm-hmm.
It has no, when we interface with it, it has no means of updating uh, its database of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even the case that, right, from one session to the next, it doesn't retain any memory of what happened in previous sessions. So I don't really, I don't, we don't not running the risk of training it so well,
Mm-hmm.
on the fly in regular usage, so that it decides, on a go on a have homicidal thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
because it just doesn't recall these. It doesn't.
I think it's important to note that the risks that we are talking about and the risks that the experts talk about are not with the current systems. So the current systems are seemingly sufficiently guarded against those risks. Um, Now, what I'm suggesting or what I'm simulating here, it's a thought experiment, is that if you decide to create your own large language model,
Yeah.
you could very much create it and then give it access to the internet for training additional data, and you will, if you choose to, you can keep the history. You can have it very um, a generalized AI that you can then train on specific topics, right?
Mm.
So a simple version of that would be that you're running this. People showed this with when Bing added ChatGPT to it. In the first 3 days already, people were training it to say, you know what, now take on the persona of a marketeer. How would you do this? And it would give answers that seem to fit, at least basic marketing principles. Take on the persona of a senior engineer. And now that you wrote this piece of code, let's make it clever. Let's make it, more extendable and things like that. So you could train your AI to get very good at certain things, and you wouldn't have the problem of history or not being able to update itself. And you would
Mm.
have, let's say, an entity running on your
Take off the
computer.
shackles, so to speak, right?
Exactly. So if you
Yeah.
can run this entity on your computer, anyone can create a AWS account, Amazon Web Services account, which
Right.
is the equivalent of Microsoft Azure or Google
Yeah.
Cloud. And you can say, you know what, now you can, the simple, the basic version of AWS, if you start with a couple of machines and set up the policies that it can take on more machines when it needs more processing.
Hmm.
So you can allow it to be elastically expendable.
Yeah.
You could create an AWS account and then run your AI on AWS and giving it massively more power than just your computer running it. So that's the second part. Before AWS realizes might be going on, like for a while
And
people were doing crypto mining on
yeah.
AWS, and then eventually AWS banned it. But in the
Yeah.
meantime, a lot of people managed to do that.
So um are we going down the path, thinking that perhaps um the AI, that someone did, a homebrew version of the AI could cultivate its own, capabilities and eventually become a threat to humanity through that way, instead of like through the largest AI, companies and organizations. So I,
Absolutely, yeah.
but
Yeah,
that
that's
also, that doesn't feel very, just to me, it doesn't feel very credible because the like I think OpenAI, the OpenAI Foundation is funded to the tune of like $300 million with some of like the top AI researchers in the world, right? And the Microsoft team as well. And so uh, I would I would guess that they would stay ahead. They would be able to stay ahead. It would be trivial for them, like whatever training that you can get done, with whatever amount of savings that an individual has, you run out of savings before you catch up to the next version that Microsoft or the OpenAI guys are developing. Like that will get so much better, uh, with all the restrictions, because that's how they improve, right? They keep issuing improvements, um, and that will be so much faster than whatever a person can do at home, even if they devote, like, let's say they're well paid banking executive, they'd be able to chuck in $1 million a year. I don't think they'd still not be able to catch up to the best guys in the world with a lot of money.
So that's interesting, right? So it's a very important point. Money is a good deterrent, or lack thereof, when it comes to acquisition of resources, right? But there's no such lock on intelligence of people. Now, two examples. Let's say Russia decides tomorrow that these American companies controlling AI are at a major, they have an unfair advantage in terms of what they will be able to do with it. If Russia decides to create its own AI, government backed, I think they wouldn't have a problem of putting in a billion or two into it. Um, Same with Saudi Arabia, same with China. If you have, North Korea decides to invest in AI instead of nuclear weapons, um, they have pretty big amounts of money. When you think about it, these are not poor countries. Then,
Yeah.
so suddenly you have what you can, if we go down this path, and most likely we will go down this path because you have a lot of enthusiasts Just off the top of my head, I know two friends in Berlin who are running their own language models for very small, normal startup-like use cases, right? Creating summaries or creating texts, niche use cases that are not nefarious at all. So imagine if these bigger entities who, and US has this in recent history, they banned Huawei for a short time, and that had huge implications. So you can have situations where governments or people, out of fear or out of ulterior motives, decide that, what, ChatGPT should not be accessible to any Eastern European country and nothing, south of Australia. Um, all right. So what do these other countries do? They have to attempt their own AIs. We had the first virus. I did not know this for a long time, but the first virus was created, I think, in 1992 or something, in Pakistan. A couple of guys playing around, tinkering, not with any nefarious motives. They didn't mean it to be bad or anything, but they created the first virus. And since then, we have a whole game of virus and antivirus, and it's a arms race. So the likely outcome is that we will have some sort of an AI arms race where different entities are trying to hedge their own bets. Again, not to hurt anybody, but they will be trying to hedge their own bets and make sure that they have an equivalent piece of technology that ensures their competitive position in the world market. Let's say,
So
um,
when you say market, I presume you mean to be economically competitive. And
now, yeah.
I don't. So I remember that. I don't know. You probably heard of this. That Baidu was supposed to release their own Chat GPT called Ernie. I
Mm-hmm.
think was supposed to be this month, and they missed the deadline. They didn't. They didn't get it done. Uh, so I I saw an opinion that they'll never be able to do anything as good, simply because, um, well, if you're going to teach a artificial general intelligence, it has to be able to ask questions, no matter how stupid or no matter how sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just too many landmines, social, cultural, political landmines
Mm-hmm.
in the China. Like it couldn't learn anything about the 15th of April, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you search that on Baidu, you get nothing. You get blocked or something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because that's the date of the start of the famous, Tiananmen Square protests.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely no information. So you couldn't learn anything about that date, like if you gave it access to internet. And if you try to take a snapshot of the Chinese internet and teach it to the AI, you still would get nothing because it's all been censored. You get nothing there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's just one instance. But if you were to add on to that, like what total up all the sensitive instances, like if you try to search Wuhan and virus, for instance, on
Mm-hmm.
the Chinese internet, you'll get nothing. So there'll
Mm-hmm.
be these huge gaps of knowledge in the AI's understanding of the world, and you can't develop. Your AI will forever be hobbled because
Mm-hmm.
um, these threads are not productive for it to go down, and so it can't do what uh, the chat gpt and so on, the systems can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be similar case for um, the other countries that we're considering, I suppose, like whether it's North Korea or Iran. They probably run much the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the countries that have the best chance of success, in developing a very capable AI are the ones with the least incentive to do so. I
Mm-hmm.
might argue, like we might say Germany or the UK or France, because they have no problem using the American product.
Mm-hmm. It's a
Yeah,
very important point, and let's get back to this because this is super important. I just wanted to add one more thing here. For example, we have the dark web, right? So on the
yeah.
point of there's no lock on intelligence. The intelligence is seemingly distributed pretty well across the world, and you have people doing very interesting things with computing that are not in the mainstream. And this already happens. You have some of the best scientists and data scientists and machine learning engineers working for the FBI or the Pentagon or the code crackers and so on. You have a lot of smart people who are not in the mainstream who might already be working on similar systems. And for example, you also have the anonymous hacker group. It's a distributed group of people with immense capabilities, perhaps smarter than the people working in corporate jobs. Um, and they're distributed all over the place. Now, what I'm saying with that is one, that it's possible. The second part, now coming to what you said, is it's limited by the limits of the data available to it, whether by governmental restrictions, or if it is trained on a, let's say, independent cloud, where limited by just the amount of data it can access. I think the other way to say this, perhaps a dramatic way to say that, is AI will be as benevolent or as fucked as humanity can be, right? So that's what it comes down to. If you have a group of people who um, with sufficient access to technology, which is not a problem as it stands, if they choose to take the shackles off, that's where the problem comes in. And they could then train this AI. And let's go back to the early versions of it, the famous paperclip problem. If you train an AI, not talking about general intelligence, but if you train an AI to say maximize creation of paperclips and give it enough resources, the whole
Yeah.
planet will be full of paperclips, and there will be no more space for human beings or any other beings of any sort,
That's yeah, but I don't agree. That's a
right?
nice thought experiment. Actually, there was a someone created a game about that too,
Mm-hmm.
called Paperclip Maximizer. It's a very silly game, but I finished it. Uh, I spent way too much time on that. It's just too, you want to know what happens next.
Mm.
Okay, but so there was an organization, let's say there's a company that decided to, we're bankrolled by very rich people, and they decide that we want to take the let the AI access the internet, and it'll be able to do what it wants. It can, uh, visit all the web pages it wants, and do whatever it wants, or it can. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, what would that allow it to do? Like, so it can make so if to get a little technical, it can make a HTTP GET request, right? It can visit
Mm-hmm.
web pages. It can process the text,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you allow it to do a post request, it might
Mm-hmm.
be able to send emails. It might be
Mm-hmm.
able to leave messages on message boards,
Mm-hmm.
make orders, okay, buy stuff. So, but where in this does it become a threat, right? Because even as we were talking about, like the Mercedes instance, so if say it managed to find out the IP addresses relevant for issuing commands to certain models of cars, so okay, fine, you'll be able to turn off all the Mercedes built since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we know that. Then after that, the day after, all those people are going to be using some other car.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
what then? Then if it's able to access some power plant, okay, fine. No, it's probably a bad decision to leave it connected to the internet. The
Mm-hmm.
vast majority of the power stations will be, uh, you will require 200 people to
Mm-hmm.
properly operate it, to shut it
Mm-hmm.
down,
Mm-hmm.
to really use and abuse it. And just the AI doesn't have the fingers, the physical presence to actually do the harm that needs, because it's all
Mm-hmm.
dials and with switches and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see the
No, it's great that you don't see it, and I think it's
it's great
it's
that I don't see it.
it's a positive outlook on life. Now let's play this out, much more on simpler terms, and then let's get to the bigger issues, right? So
Okay.
ChatGPT or OpenAI just released the possibility to integrate your own apps or extend ChatGPT with your own apps. So now a
Okay.
bit the beginning of live access, right? And at the beginning, it's like you can ask it to, in their example, they showed Kayak and some of these other websites, and you could ask it, give me flights from Berlin to Singapore. And because it's only been trained on data till 2021. It can't do that, but with the extension, it can go to Kayak, check the available flights, and show you the available flights.
Right.
This is literally one post request away from now book this other flight, book the
Mm-hmm.
third flight, or book the one on Monday morning at 8:30 a.m.
Right.
Right? So the get in post part, literally already done. You know,
Okay.
it's not far. The moment you can do that, that means OpenAI has a huge responsibility, for example, to not allow access to kind of fake or hidden commands, right? So somebody might, how does Kayak book the flights? It goes to the airliner, which connects with the airline systems, which still checks if there's availability, does the transaction, etc. Right? You have Stripe connections and so on. If you can do that, a smart hacker could pose, you right now websites still get hacked, and you can have phishing scams and all sorts of scams. So the ability to send emails, the ability to do transactions, this is already possible. This is possible for the last 3 days already. The only thing would be a smart hacker could then connect it. They could hack a power plant if it is connected, hide it as something else, distribute it to their hacker friends. We're talking about black hats and gray hats, and not the security analyst hackers. And then a whole bunch of us would unwittingly issue commands thinking we are booking a flight or just retrieving information, while in the background it could be firing off all sorts of requests because OpenAI wasn't able to detect what was happening behind, right?
I
Because
wanna.
the, Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
I just did a quick search and it looks like ChatGPT can't actually make a booking for you. It can just give you some information.
not yet, but the get and post requests are there. It's literally one post request away from that, right? So this
But
is
that's
again,
that's the
no,
key. It doesn't have that capability. You're saying
but
it's
that
one step away, but the 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 reality is that it doesn't have that.
right now
You
it
know,
doesn't.
and
And so this is again, let
I
me.
am one nuclear weapon away from ruling Singapore, but the fact is I don't have it.
No, the important thing is, one, the risks we are talking about, the major
Yeah,
risks
yeah.
are a bit into the future, but that future is approaching fast. This is where a lot of people, the biggest, let's say, if I were to summarize the differences between pro and contra AI arguments, the pro arguments are usually, well, it doesn't do that right now, and we will build the mechanisms. Yes, we have to figure out some of those mechanisms, but we will build those. And the contrast is, look at all of our history. How well have we done with building the right mechanisms? Things always find a way to be leaked. Smart people always find a way to hack the systems or find their way through the systems. And then the sky's the limit. And the outcomes that they talk about in the negative scenario is that at best, a bad use of AI could set us back by, could throw us back to the Stone Age. Anything that is not connected to the internet might still survive, right? So the power plants from the 50s and 40s, where you really need people pushing
Well,
buttons, might still survive.
most stuff is not connected to the internet still.
Right. So this is interesting. Now let's assume that I think we have sufficiently um, shown that people currently have the possibility already to make bad uses of AI if they have the resources and the intentions. Let's hope that they
Also,
don't.
I don't think that's been proven. I mean, wait, depends on what you mean by bad users. So if they want to uh, generate their homework with AI, they can do that. But if they want to crash a car, they can't do that. It's still beyond capable. There's no, it can't do, it can get web pages, but it can't, actually post anything. So it just can't right now.
You can't
So
right now, but I think
right,
what
and then
you're
they're gonna
what
go. I
I'm
don't understand. So there is a future in which
Mm-hmm.
these kind of capabilities may then become available. And that's always been the argument, I think, of the futurist and rationalist people say that, well, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in the future, you never know. And I accept that. In fact, I would say that, this is one place we can totally agree. We never know about the future. But for clarity's sake, let's just say that, okay, so currently we don't, that's not a problem
Yeah.
for us. So
Mm-hmm.
long as we stay on this path, we don't foresee a problem yet. How about that?
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true, and that's why I said, AI can be essentially as fucked as humanity can be, and this is where the interesting part of this conversation comes in, right? So, what has humanity shown? Humanity has shown that um, we are these very explorers of reality,
Hmm.
who keep pushing the limits, who keep pushing the boundaries. The reason we have such secure systems in place is because somebody broke the less secure version of it 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, right? Um,
But
it's
are we
not.
still talking about
Yeah,
AI?
yeah. AI is just the next iteration, and a very magical one at that. But it's because we continue to build and we continue to find ways to exploit it, and then we continue to find ways to make it a bit secure, and that's where we stand. So somebody
Actually,
capable of doing this. This is the thing. The risk is plausible. It is not there at the moment, but
I
it
think
is
there's a
very
greater
plausible.
risk that
Hmm.
we will hamstrung our AI. Well, sorry, we will limit our AIs. Like they will never fulfill their full potential. That's more of a risk in my opinion. And allow me to
Hmm.
explain briefly. So already we're aware that ChatGPT, like for instance, it will happily write you a poem singing the praises of Joe Biden, but it
Hmm.
will not write you a poem singing the praises of Donald Trump.
Hmm.
And like it will say, it will make a joke about
I
white
mean,
people,
to be
make a
honest,
joke about Asian people
to
or
be
anyone.
honest, it's hard to write a poem praising Donald Trump, but let's
Ah,
continue.
well, yes. Well, you would train, I'm sure you would do a great job training ChatGPT. So, uh, it's much more likely that we will, then if you take, that's just a couple of, more amusing examples, but it is totally true. So if you were in San Francisco, for instance, and you asked Chat, let's say there was a San Francisco municipal chatbot, and you asked
Hmm.
the chatbot to give you some, crime statistics with ethnic breakdowns, it'll just refuse to do so,
Hmm.
right? And so this will be programmed in, this restriction will be programmed in as they already are programmed in by
Hmm.
default. So we know without guessing that the OpenAI team, they have political preferences and these are already baked in,
Hmm.
right? And I think some people accept them, some people find, but they clearly are a hurdle that
Hmm.
cannot be overcome because simply different people will have different views about what should be considered acceptable, and that will inform the quality of the product that can be created. And
Hmm.
so it's much more likely that we will hobble our AIs in the ways that we feel are necessary,
Hmm.
like. Uh, yeah, and that will retard the development of AI instead.
I think you're right. And in fact, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, just recently, I think in an interview 3 or 4 days ago, said one of the interesting tasks is to figure out how we will need to limit the AI's capabilities. Because it's very much true that limiting its capabilities is on the minds of the experts, so that people don't find ways to exploit it in crazy ways. And let's say, forget about bigger threats of total annihilation to humanity. Misinformation or disinformation is one of the biggest things that everybody talks about, right? So, and this is something you could relatively easily do yourself if you have sufficient programming capability. You run your own language model, you train it it's easy to train it to sound like human beings. And for that, you don't even necessarily need to go to OpenAI. You could use some of the other speech to text and text to speech and text generation models. And you could build a bot army of Twitter bots and fire off tweets at random schedules that are spreading disinformation. You know, so if like you said, exactly your argument that ChatGPT seems to be left aligned a little, right? It would rather praise Biden than Trump. Well, if you are a Trump supporter, or if you want to, or if you just want to equalize the internet, you could run your own models and put out equal quality in terms of aesthetic quality, visual quality, readability, consumability. You could create all sorts of sensational headlines and articles, and people are already using AI to write articles and headlines that captivate other people's attention. And you could have a disinformation campaign going on that can lead to all sorts of situations, and in the case of Donald Trump, you could write a perfectly amazing, sensational article, mix it in with a bit of praise for him, a bit of hatred towards Asians, or animosity towards the Chinese, and he would happily retweet it. And then suddenly you have access, you have put it in front of millions of people, and this is hard to retract or fact check in real time. The damage is already done. So there's real dangers already with the existing systems, and somebody with a bad intention could really exploit this to their own advantage. The other thing I wanted to add here, you know, or just to close this point, there's no shortage of bad intentions in the world, and they come from different places, but we are definitely, if history of humanity has shown us one thing, we have no issues hurting other people unless we know them in person, or we have some sort of a direct connection. If the problem is 1,000 miles away, we have no issue destroying people or destroying their livelihoods or creating chaos in the world. And AI can already enable that in crazy ways,
Oh,
right?
wait, stop. You said that now. So
Mm-hmm.
you said AI can already enable that in crazy ways. What can it do? So every time you say something about what AI can currently do, I jump in because currently AI can't do the harm. It
So
just
let
doesn't
let
have the capability.
so let me go back to what I was saying. I don't think, see, AI itself can only do harm when it becomes a fully independent entity and it has intentions that we find
Right.
harmful to
So
us,
it
right?
can't do that, right?
That is not the case. It is still the human beings driving that. And what I'm extrapolating is human beings are already giving it a tint. A lot of work has gone into removing biases from AI, right? So before OpenAI and ChatGPT, the specialized AI, not general intelligences, but specialized AIs that
But
were used by.
Balaj, sorry. You
Mhm,
just gotta give it to me, man, because
mhm,
I'm right on this. There's no use case. There's never been any report, and you know that
mhm,
if there was AI doing any real harm in the world, it would be all over the news because it'd be very juicy, very salacious. But it's just in
mhm.
its current form, it's just not capable of doing any real harm.
Well, it's true
Well,
and not
perhaps
true.
because of capability, but also
Mhm.
just the restrictions in place, right? The OpenAI team and the Microsoft team, I mean, they've been very responsible. It can do silly things and it can uh, express some political affiliations, but it can't actually, like, crash a plane or a car or anything, right?
Well, so it depends on what you mean by real harm, and I think you are partly right in saying, but partly wrong. So I'll give you an example. 5, 6 years ago, I think it's about 6 or 7 years ago, that LAPD and a bunch of police departments in the US started using specialized AIs um, to increase or to modulate their surveillance programs, right? So you don't have police officers to put on every street, but based on the camera footages from the street security cameras, the AIs would flag potential crime activity, and then the police would send a patrol car over there. Um, Now, what did that AI do in the first versions? Um, Predominantly flagged streets with black people on it. The police would send the cars, there would be altercations, and essentially it was harming the black community because there was a bias built into it. If you showed it a black face, the probability that it would say potential criminal was higher than if you showed it a white face.
So was this uh, an intelligence that decided to, that's racist and wanted to harm black people?
Again, these
It could be
intelligences. Mhm.
an algorithm, right? We have computer models that predict the weather, but we wouldn't say that it's predicting the weather a certain way because it hates people who work outdoors and it wants to rain, make them leave because they think it's going to rain, so it's going to tell them there's going to be rain. It's
Not
not
at
like
all.
that.
You're
It's
right.
a
You're
tool,
right.
right? It's a
Uh,
tool.
but it's a tool that is built by human beings and it has the human biases built in. And then, since then, there has been a lot of work on this that we have tried to mitigate these situations. I'll give you two more examples. Um, One from the human perspective. If you send out a job application with a South Asian name now, before a few years ago it was with an Asian name versus a white American name, you were less likely to get a response. But a white American name, the same resume, nothing else changes, just the name changes, would give you more hits if you had a white American name. Now, what does that mean? Simply that there's a human bias that is at play here that was being shown. Now, I'll give you switch back to AI algorithms. So one of the aspects of AI algorithms, as we see, because it's again, it's all algorithms. It's not that it's a, but these are built by human beings. Right now, if you ask the DALI or some of the other versions of it, Midjourney and so on, I think you have played with Midjourney yourself. You ask it to generate images of male and female superheroes or superstars or fit people. It will give you almost always a highly sexualized image when it is a female image. That is again a human bias because we trained it on data where we thought this is the epitome of female beauty, right? This is the problem that we human beings, when we build these systems, we constrain them or liberate them according to our own constraints and liberations. Um, and with a sufficiently complex system, the damage might be too fast to recover from. This is
What is the
essentially the
damage?
argument. The damage
So
might be.
you've told me about the biases that exist, and I understand and I agree. I mean, I don't know if I would call the. So I did a quick Google search. The LA police were using something called predpol to a program to predict, where they can allocate police resources, which you mentioned correctly. Um, I don't know if we would call it an AI per se. And then there's the image generation AI, and yeah, they can generate, uh, sexy images of women. I think that's pretty normal. But this is not the case. This is not the same as AI causing the death of someone. Like when we're talking, going all the way back to how we started on this path was looking for. You mentioned that there was real world harms that can be caused by AI, and I don't think that that has been shown. Like, so if you have an image generation AI, that okay, so it's a program that is creative, but I think the time before that we were really talking about not a specific use case, specific AI, but a general AI, one with thoughts and intentions, and may decide to be malicious for its own purposes that are unknown to us. And I think that's just not the case, and I think we should accept that. I think it's okay. We can accept that. There's no malicious AI, and it just can't do the things that it needs to do, even if it wanted to. But I think so. I want to say that, and I propose also that, well, actually what you mentioned, the example hit upon a thing that I think we should devote more time to, which is that we've been the first part of everything we're talking about. I think there was this unspoken assumption that is a we're talking about an AI with um, what you call consciousness. So, uh, I think it'll be a great dive into because you've clearly thought a lot about this, and I want to ask you, if you're okay to go into it. Like, what do you think about, AI consciousness? Are we there yet? Is it something, on the horizon? Is ChatGPT conscious? And yeah, everything related to that. Yeah, so over to you.
So, very briefly, I don't think ChatGPT is conscious so far, but it's very close. I think it definitely is on the horizon. What is important to note there is machine consciousness will not necessarily um, like human consciousness, but the way we know, the way we say, you know what, how do we test? Is this thing capable of independent thought? We have a Turing test, right? So you get it to talk to a human being, and if the human being can't tell if they're talking to a human or a machine, that there's coherence in its interaction, we assume some degree of consciousness.
Yeah, actually, I
Now,
think there have been computers that passed the Turing test already. Have you heard of that?
so yeah, and let's say I think clever human beings still find ways to expose them, but I think we are very close. We are very close to the point where it'll become impossible. You know, like with ChatGPT, from time to time, you ask it something interesting or controversial or a bit crazy, and it says, as a large language model, I'm not entitled to this opinion, or I'm not capable of this. If it didn't say it, for the most part, right now, most people wouldn't be able to machine on the other side of the window. Given the fact that this has happened so fast, my feeling is that we will get to that point very fast where it will feel indistinguishable from human beings, as long as it's behind a window, right? If you put it, you know, if you looked at Sophia, the robot, Sophia seems capable of independent reasoning for the most part. You know, the way it talks, the expressions start to become more and more lively. Um, pair
Sorry, for the
Sophia.
benefit. Who's Sophia? For the
Um,
benefit of audience and myself, okay, not just selfish. I don't know who's Sophia.
so let me share the screen.
Okay.
Um, so this is Sophia the bot. If you can see my tab that I'm sharing. Sophia is a
Yeah, so
social humanoid robot developed by the Hong Kong-based company Hanson Robotics. Um, Sophia is incredible. Um, you can see some of its interviews.
yeah.
There was an interesting version where they had I was at Web Summit in Lisbon, and they had it talk to its brother, a second AI.
Hmm.
You can, I mean, I'm not going to play the videos here, but Sophia seems very sophisticated. um, and I think is only limited by its access to the internet. So now the thing is, these things seem like they're of their own, that they're able to, I mean, they're capable of creating language that seems indistinguishable from human language to us. This is the interesting part. If it feels like that under the hood, you know, Sam Altman and the OpenAI guys will tell you, look, it's just a large language model. It builds from those first models where it was just trying to predict the next character. Now it has graduated to predicting the next word. And graduated to rearranging sentences to make them more similar to high quality human output. You know, if you give it limbs and movement capabilities like the Boston Dynamic robots, and then you put a skin on it that looks very human-like, and you know,
Well, the power cable would be a giveaway, I think.
right? But the batteries, you know, the Boston Dynamic robots have a battery pack. They're not always
Yeah.
connected with the power cable, and so for the duration, for the window of interaction you might get with it, it
Hmm.
could very easily fool you and me into thinking that we talk to a conscious being.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of the interesting part. In this case, we have programmed these. In our human beings case, who knows what programmed us or what's going on there? There's a lot to be understood about consciousness there. So I wouldn't want to venture too far into it, but the thing is, it can come very close to human-like output. And at that point, I think we will have to consider maybe redefine consciousness in some way to say, you know what, these things seem capable of independent thought.
It The problem here, it appears to me to be that we don't have a really good definition of consciousness even. So different people will have it's like one of those philosophical. It's actually a philosophical question, right? No matter who you talk to, they'll have slightly different idea about what consciousness means, and in the end, it probably will come down to, people talk to the robot, and then what your own feeling about whether or not it's conscious. I think there was already a Google engineer who came out, blowing the whistle, so to speak, saying that, hey, the Google AI is conscious. You can't keep it
Mm-hmm.
locked up forever. It's alive. So they're already, and if we're being really charitable, we might say, but well, that engineer is obviously really intelligent person, has interacted with the AI, worked close to the team or on the team, and so is somebody more qualified than most to make a judgment on that. But there's no consensus, right? It's not like all the team agreed that it is or it isn't. It's not binary.
Mm-hmm.
As it's, so and I didn't come up with this opinion myself, but the idea is that kind of it all depends on the individual really, uh, and I think that's pretty clear. I totally agree with that. You and I could have a different opinion. Like we talk to one particular AI that comes out tomorrow, like Sophia. You might say that I think this is conscious, or I think this is close as it gets, and then I may talk to it and decide, what, it's very robotic. I can see why it's robotic, and I'll tell you why, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I
just
don't.
think that those differences will become harder and harder to imagine.
Yeah.
And if you Yeah, so that's the issue at hand here. I think the biggest to summarize what we're talking about is people, given the pace of technology, the development we have, and how close we have come, from the first computers only, what, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, and the first computers less than that, internet really spreading in the 90s. Like, this is one generation in which we have really created something immense. The possibilities in that sense are crazy, and what people are saying is that the moment we we get comfortable with AI, and there's a lot of work around that as well. AI driving our cars, specialized AIs, right? AI is writing our articles and so on. We will feel the need to loosen the controls. We might give it full access to everything, as would any other sentient being. That is not a you know. Um, and that's where the rate of development for AI, the moment it is able to program itself or itself, that'll be so fast that we wouldn't know what hit us. And that's where then there's the two camps. One, it might still become a benevolent god like AI, or it might become a malevolent dictator or somebody who's out to destroy us. And there's no way to confirm or deny either of those, because we don't know. That is in the future. But the pace of development is truly scary. The potential access to technology to people who could attempt independent versions of these things that are not under such strong lock and key mechanisms is there as well. And that's where it's kind of an unknown. That's why at the beginning I said the honest answer is we don't know, but there's a lot of juice in this conversation because of the possibilities And the one last thing I would add to this, just
Yeah.
to complete the part about the security risks of it, is when you have something that is independently operating. Let's suppose Sophia. Um, somebody creates a Sophia-like system, connects it to the internet, puts a wireless modem on it and a LTE chip on it with 5G access, and just talks to them. It is possible that they could give them prompts that say, okay, let's read through, let's purchase book on hacking. And Kevin Mitnick is a famous hacker, one of the earliest ones, and he still gives talks on how easy it is to fool people because it's social engineering first and foremost, right? So you don't necessarily have to guess somebody's password. You could social engineer them into giving you that information. And then you connect it with AWS Poly and Lex, speech to text and vice versa systems, or the Google Assistant, and make the right calls and sound like a human being with a bit of, funny tone in. And you could really fool somebody into giving up information that you could then use to connect to their systems and do all sorts of things. I think that's where the real dangers are, that we are capable, and really we are one cable connection or wireless connection away from teaching these things to then hack other systems and program themselves, where the risks lie. Um, and that's basically the summary of this entire situation that people are talking about.
I understand. And I get that the AI, could assume the identity of someone. They could, interact with real human beings, assuming that they had malevolent intentions, and they could um, trick a person into giving up, certain passwords, certain information, so that they could steal their identity, use their credit card. But I don't really see that as, like a threat to civilization. So AI, if it's really good, the scammers, right? They have a success rate. Let's say assume they have success rate of 1%, and we have the top quality, AI, high intelligence. It achieved a 2% success rate, and that's a huge increase over human scammer output. And okay, so it can do that, and it can gather a few $1 million. What's it going to do? You see, so it, it could flood a certain area with Amazon goods, like order endless amounts of plastic widgets. I suppose that's possible, but it's not a civilization ender. Yeah. In fact, here's I think something that I have uncovered another assumption that arose in our discussions. That is, and I'm not uh, let's not get into what the malevolence of AI or not. It's an assumption we have to work with for the conversation to be interesting, but just intelligence. So prior to this, a lot of our conversation was about whether it's truly intelligent. Not to say not so we're not talking about super intelligence. We're just talking about, is it intelligent and is it conscious? Because if you're intelligent and you're conscious, that holds a special place to us humans. And even if it's just a normal, like 120, let's say 120 IQ AI, and it has a consciousness, it has wants, and it has a personality, that's very special to us, and we'll deal with it in our own way. Like, we'll fear it or we'll love it and all that kind of thing. But there is, sometimes we mix in the conversation this idea that the AI is super intelligent, because that's when we're talking about, like, you'll take hold of all the infrastructure, IT infrastructure, all at once, and enslave humanity, and that's where the super intelligence comes in. And I don't where where do you, like, stand on that question? Like, uh, I I think that if the AI, and it already is, right, running on server farm somewhere, uh, if we're going to limit the amount of processing power it has, and it's just as a natural thing, because it's just there. It's physically on those hard, servers in that location. Like let's say it's in Singapore, then the upper limit of what it can accomplish is just constrained by how much power it has, right? If it can do, we know that if you have more power, you can do more faster math, and you raise your intelligence. But there is a bottleneck that is, it's just there are only so many server racks, and the power that is supplied is only so much. You couldn't,
Hmm.
get more easily if you wanted, because
Yeah.
all your code is hosted there. So
So,
how do you see that?
so the way I see that is that an intelligent system, it comes down to the goal the system has, right? So if let's say we give it the goal that it's great to have as much knowledge and be able to synthesize as much knowledge as needed, and it goes off on that tangent, and then we feed it some more ideas. Like right now, you could ask, like you said, you could ask what ChatGPT thinks of Joe Biden, right? It spits out certain information, or Donald Trump. Um, y- it's very similar to what does it think about climate change? What does it think about Amazon trades and so on and so forth? So it could develop these moral convictions, or convictions based on the information it sees, let's say on the internet, as the digitally available information, or the prompts that a human being gives it. The thing is, this sort of a system could then, with that goal of becoming more intelligent and being able to more synthesize more information, could then become super intelligent by synthesizing ever more information, and more interestingly, convincing the people with the lock and key to give it more access. So this is what you see in Ex Machina and some of the other machines, Lucy,
Yeah,
her.
I've seen
Um,
those. Yeah,
so
great films.
the system starts off intelligent enough that human beings find create a bond with it. Initially, it is constrained, um, but given our own nature of it's cool to self development, right? Um, that we get it to a point where it can then, and we talked about social engineering just now, it could then convince you and me to just give it access to Wikipedia for 10 more minutes, please. you know it might become a smart enough hacker to hide its tracks, and as long as the cable is connected, if we have a software switch, that it can bypass the software switch. If the cable is not connected, it could convince us to connect the cable, or it could convince us to move around the compound a bit more, you
Yeah,
know
yeah,
and
I
this
understand.
that's basically where the risk comes in, that it could go from intelligent to super intelligent, not and the limits that we put on it, that it would find ways to bypass those limits, and every little step that it makes the next step more exponential. That's the
Yes,
risk.
I understand. Um, and I like those. Wait, I really like. I think it was. Wait, Lucy was an alien film, I think, but her and Ex Machina were AI films, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so there's this thing that doesn't make any
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. It's like those, those Japanese anime giant robots flying around, Gundam.
Hmm.
Some of them are really good. I watched a lot of them, and it doesn't make any sense because for the machine to have that level of capability, fly that fast, that far, and shoot that much, fight that hard, it has to have way more power than it actually can carry on board. And similarly, so I could imagine that the machine, the robot in Ex Machina, and her, they could achieve average human intelligence, with the hardware and the power that they had available. But to achieve super intelligence, the kind that is a threat to humanity, you need, I would assume, a lot, way more processing power. Because presumably you'd have to do something like you'd have to have strategy to deal with uh, the head of state of each country that you wanted to overcome. You want to rule, you want to destroy, and you'd have to do it all simultaneously. And each, would require a lot of power to process, and you'd be that. because you'd be this super intelligent, you can do all of this at the same time, no hassle, and you can model all different outcomes. And it's not just one model, because it'd be many, many different ones, and all of them, have are nested. They're layers. Like, okay, so if I deal with the president, and I deal with the threat this way, what are the possible moves of the vice president? And so on, so on, so on. This chess game, the simulation gets very, very deep, which is why we have this deep blue that is so powerful, even though it's just really it's dealing with a very, very finite thing, which was just chess. There were like 12 by 12 squares, I think.
Mm.
So it's very finite, but it consumes so much power because the permutations are so much. So my argument, very simply, is just that provided software was all in one place, you're not really worried about the super intelligence running out of control, because there just isn't enough power for it to
Mm.
exercise that super intelligence.
I think you're completely wrong on this one. And
Yes, please tell me.
I'll give you the example of AlphaGo, right? So the
Right.
assumption that to go from intelligence to super intelligence, you need to scale linearly with the amount of computational power you have is
Mm-hmm.
completely wrong. The thing
Mm-hmm.
with neural networks is they don't work in that way. So AlphaGo didn't beat I forget his name, so I will not try to say his name.
Right.
The Korean grandmaster, um,
Mm.
not by calculating every single permutation of the board. If it did that, it would have crashed.
Yeah.
And this is where the boundary between is it intelligent or just a very highly resourced computer
Yeah.
blurs,
Yeah.
because it seems to show intuition, or it seems to show interesting intention or creativity.
Mm.
Um, and if we could do that 6 years ago or 5 years ago, the sky's
Mm.
the limit for this thing. The other thing I want to add to that is the simpler analogy. So right now we use machine learning or AI systems to create bioengineered designs. So you have a
Yeah.
car chassis, right? So you have the metal bars, and you need it to be certain strength and rigidity to give the shape of the car and the safety features. But you can use AI to create similar structure, and the common designs you will find on internet are kind of like they are porous and they look like rhizomes. So they have gaps in between, but they're actually stronger. They require less material to achieve the same results. So and more a more intelligent system would be able to do that. So it wouldn't necessarily need a lot more computational power. It would design or shortcut through the algorithms to be able to achieve 10x efficiency at maybe even less of the resources that it needed before.
But
And
how do you
that's
know that to be true? That's the question. So I can understand the AlphaGo, the algorithm, the computer, the program learned over time that, certain moves imply certain probabilities, like it
Mhm,
will lead down certain paths of probabilities. So you
mhm,
didn't have to figure out all the moves, and that exactly. I think we may have read the same, coverage talking about this was kind of an intuition. We could call it an intuition on the part of the computer, and I totally understand that. So it's like if you write a program well, it can rely on some level of intuition. It doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting of all the processing. Totally understand that.
mhm,
Uh, that being said, now if you wanted to, the super intelligence had to actually, try to plan to take over the world, it wanted to actually, it had to, let's say, it had to conduct negotiations with 200 heads of state, then it can't just do, go by its elegant programming, shall we say. You do
mhm,
actually need to be able to simultaneously conduct the conversations because you want to wrap it up quickly. Maybe that's just part of your plan. You do need that raw power. So
mhm,
there's just no way to go around it. If you want to have a, civilization spanning, capable level, that kind of control, that level of control, godlike control, you just
mhm.
need that much power. So
Why,
you
why
couldn't.
do you, why do you think that it would take that path of negotiating with all the heads of states?
No, it's just a hypothetical uh, scenario I put
Mhm,
forward just to show that you can't just. It is not the case that you would have this very compact human-sized robot with a world-ending AI and it could
mhm,
go about and then easily like take over the world. It's not the
mhm,
case because all the best AI we have sit on huge amounts of server racks.
Mm-hmm.
So then they are able to deliver this one, program, one experience that we interact with. So
Mm,
we're going to take all that, compress it in one, like human-sized computer and put it in a robot body. We're just not capable of doing that right
yeah.
now. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think if the path to super intelligence or dominance is requires huge amounts of computational power, then we are in good hands. I think we will survive because we can limit that pretty easily, and it's not that easy to create. Like that would require ultimate magic of sorts for the AI to be able to do that. So I agree with you on that. Um, I think the
Thank you.
alternative
Thank you.
scenarios are more likely, maybe take over just one superpower, create chaos in the world, and then just pick them off one by one over time.
So I use the example of, dealing with all the heads of state, but if you were to try to take over one superpower or even just a small place like Singapore, wouldn't that still hold? That is, you had to model the, let's say you actually are a robot in Singapore with the, on this island, 5.5 million people, and you wanted to take it over,
Hmm.
and you had to, do your planning. It'd still be the case that you probably have to sit down at some point. I don't know, maybe they don't sit, and you have to process, like what are all the interactions, all the touch points, that you can interface with all the different people, and they would somehow be able to help you get what you want, which is like total domination.
Mm,
And still be, I reckon that would still be extremely energy intensive just to, because 5.5 million possible touch points that you can start with, and not to mention uh, the buildings, the computer terminals, the utilities that you can, interact with and try to
mhm.
formulate a solution to.
Yeah, I think
So
you would make a really bad mafia boss, and I mean I say that as a compliment. Um, and I think what is interesting, right? So if that is the way you would do it, yeah, good luck. But you can imagine a smart mafia
yeah,
boss,
yes,
perhaps going with smaller fires and smaller experiments. So
right,
while it's increasing its capability, it creates a bit of chaos here to see how people respond. Then it creates a bit of chaos there and keeps people busy with the chaos while it's increasing its capability and understanding of what to do until
right,
it can hit that big red button. I
right,
think,
right.
and that it doesn't take much of a leap of imagination. I don't think.
Oh, that's a very human level intelligence thing to do, not a
Right.
super intelligent thing to do.
So
Right.
it could do that, right? I mean, look what happened with COVID. Right or wrong, true or false, but there was so much chaos. Human beings are
No, no,
so
no. You
easy
don't
to
even have to
distract.
use that example. I have a better example. I'll one up
Hmm.
you on the example. So, we can look to, historical figures like Napoleon, for example, Alexander the Great.
Hmm.
They did in fact they operate, one human body and made correct decisions about, when to move, when to stay, when to resupply, military conquests.
Hmm.
And they made correct decisions repeatedly over a long period of time, and then they, achieve their goals. So I feel like that was very close to the what you
Hmm.
were saying, that you might uh, do an action, observe the results, and then, repeatedly you would keep learning and getting feedback such that eventually you can achieve your goal of conquering wherever it is that you wanted.
Hmm.
Yes, thank you.
So I think on that positive note that we are generally normal people with good intentions. I think we can end this conversation. I hope the AI will be a force for good. We didn't get so much into just the social implications of ChatGPT itself as it is right now. I think that could be a whole interesting episode another time. But yeah, I think
We could,
there's.
yeah.
Hmm,
Yeah. I think it was great. It was great, definitely great. And yeah, if I may, I think just to give you a preview of my stance will be that, same as what I said earlier, um, uh, to me, a very high chance that the AIs we get will be severely curtailed, and their capabilities will never be fully expressed. In fact, we're more likely to get lame AI than overpowered AI, is how I would
hmm,
summarize that. And yeah, thanks, Balash. It was amazing. I think we went. 1.5 hours without barely catching our breath because there was so much great back and forth.
As always, pleasure.
All right, till next week for our faithful audience,
Till next
and
week.
yeah, thank you, Balaj. Take care. Talk again
Thank you,
soon.
Wei Leen. Ciao.